The steppe does not announce change. It stretches as it always has, a skin of grass drawn tight beneath a sky that refuses permanence. Wind moves first, then light. Morning arrives without color at the horizon, only a thinning of darkness, a loosening of cold. The land breathes slowly, exhaling frost from the ground, inhaling the promise of movement. Hooves have passed here before and will pass again. Tracks appear, blur, vanish. Nothing on the steppe asks to be remembered. Snow withdraws unevenly. In hollows it lingers, crusted and gray. On open ground it breaks apart under sun and wind, sinking back into the soil. Rivers respond without urgency. Ice fractures along the edges, releasing narrow channels of water that slide forward, patient and silent. Grass does not rush its return. It waits, testing the season. The land has learned caution through repetition. Within this space, movement begins again. Camps loosen, then reform. Tents are struck and folded, poles bundled, loads balanced. Animals shift restlessly, sensing the widening of possibility. Nothing here is fixed. Stability is carried, not built. The steppe tolerates those who move with it and wears down those who resist. A man rides out before the camp stirs fully. His horse moves at an even pace, conserving strength. He watches the ground more than the distance ahead, reading the soil for softness, the grass for promise. His coat is worn, it seems repaired more than once. There is no ornament to mark him. His presence does not command attention. He rides because riding clarifies what standing cannot. He has lived long enough to recognize patterns without naming them. The way animals drift toward water before thirst sharpens. The way men grow restless when paths reopen. The way hunger returns if caution lapses. These lessons arrived early, before certainty, before protection. Memory does not distinguish between childhood and survival. Both taught the same thing. He turns his horse back toward the camp as light strengthens. Fires have begun to smoke. Figures move with purpose, each task unfolding without signal. This is familiar ground. The work is ordinary, and that is its strength. Nothing here depends on declaration. Responsibility came to him before ambition found its shape. He learned to count losses before imagining gain. When his father's presence vanished from the camp, the absence did not ask permission. It required response. Food had to be found. Alliances had to be weighed. Retreat was sometimes wiser than resistance. Survival was not heroic. It was exacting. He remembers hunger not as pain but as narrowing, choices closing one by one. The pressure of deciding which animal to slaughter, which path to avoid, which quarrel to endure rather than answer. These decisions formed him more than any later claim to authority. Power, when it arrived as weight. Now others look to him, though not always directly. They measure his movements, his silences. They notice when he rides early, when he delays. Expectation gathers without ceremony. He does not encourage it. He also does not refuse it. Leadership, he has learned, is rarely chosen in advance. It accumulates through obligation. The camp depends on systems older than any one life. Paths remembered rather than marked. Pastures rotated by season and need. Exchange conducted with care, guided by memory of scarcity. Justice handled close to the ground, where delay weakens trust. These systems hold because they must. They have been shaped by failure as much as success. Trade moves along thin lines between settlements that do not share walls. Metal arrives from distant hands, reshaped by local need. Felt hides, livestock move outward in return. Exchange is cautious. Excess invites attention. Dependence invites vulnerability. Balance is maintained through dispersal. Disputes surface without warning. Animals stray. Boundaries blur. No one speaks of rights. Only consequences matter. The man listens more than he speaks, weighing what will fracture less. He knows that force resolves little if it multiplies enemies faster than it secures ground. Pressure gathers as camps drift closer with the season. Water draws movement inward. Grazing thins. A neighboring group presses against shared space, not out of malice but necessity. Horses disappear one night. The loss is counted carefully. Anger rises, then steadies. The problem is practical. If left unanswered, it will return. Impulse suggests speed. A strike would satisfy those who feel diminished. He resists it. Retaliation would draw others in, tightening the circle. He chooses instead to measure. Messengers ride with gifts weighted by warning. Strength is shown without being spent. The response is not praised. It holds. From this restraint, expectation settles. Boundaries are honored not by decree but by memory of consequence. Leadership shifts from command to maintenance. The work becomes quieter. Decisions repeat themselves until they no longer feel like decisions. Stability allows others to attach themselves. Families align not through conquest but confidence. Camps grow gradually. Movement slows as planning extends further ahead. The man feels the weight of more lives pressing against each choice. Freedom narrows as responsibility widens. Loss arrives without announcement. An elder fails to rise one morning. A child sickens and does not recover. Grief is carried privately. Leadership does not lessen it. It only prevents collapse. Fatigue settles deep, shaping thought with blunt clarity. As seasons turn, he understands that what endures is not his presence but the habits he reinforces. Younger figures observe, adapt. Responsibility shifts without ceremony. The steppe remains. Camps will move. Names will fade. What persists is the fragile order built through restraint, repeated under an open sky, where continuity belongs to those who choose obligation before desire. Summer does not arrive all at once. It settles unevenly, testing patience. Heat gathers first in the low ground, then spreads outward, drawing insects from the grass and dust from the hooves of animals that move too quickly. Water becomes deliberate. Each camp measures distance not in space, but in endurance. The steppe offers abundance briefly and punishes haste immediately. The man adjusts without announcing it. He rises earlier, rests when the sun stands highest, watches the herds for signs of strain that others overlook. Years of repetition have sharpened his attention. He knows which animals will falter first, which men will hide exhaustion until it becomes dangerous. Leadership reveals itself here as continuous observation, quiet and unbroken. Growth brings friction. New families arrive carrying habits formed elsewhere. Old agreements are tested by unfamiliar hands. Memory does not transfer cleanly. The man listens to grievances fully before weighing them. He understands that conflict often begins as misalignment rather than intent. Correction, when required, is applied early and narrowly before resentment hardens. Trade thickens as paths reopen. Caravans appear more frequently now, their animals lean, their drivers cautious. Grain and cloth move across the steppe alongside metal shaped into more precise tools. With these goods come expectations. Regular exchange promises stability but risks dependence. He allows trade to expand but insists on dispersion. No single route is permitted to become essential. Redundancy is survival. Justice becomes slower and more deliberate. Disputes no longer resolve only through proximity or force. Elders are consulted. Patterns of behavior are recalled. Memory begins to function as structure. Punishment remains rare. Restitution becomes preferred. Predictability proves more effective than severity. A pressure rises from within. A group grows impatient with restraint, drawn toward faster gain through raids beyond agreed limits. The temptation is familiar. He recognizes it from earlier years, when survival felt narrower and risk more tolerable. Now the cost is clearer. Retaliation would spiral outward, drawing all into cycles that consume stability. He chooses containment. Those inclined toward disruption find access limited. They are not expelled but constrained. Participation now carries conditions. The message requires no declaration. After days of tension, the group fractures along its own lines. Some depart. Those who remain adjust. The system absorbs the loss without breaking. From this separation, structure sharpens. Expectations settle into conditions rather than requests. Authority becomes less personal, more procedural. The man senses the shift immediately. Decisions no longer require his constant presence. He becomes a reference rather than a center. The change brings relief and unease in equal measure. Fatigue accumulates. Recovery lengthens after long rides. Names slip briefly, then return. He compensates by relying more openly on others, trusting the methods he has reinforced. Letting go becomes an act of discipline. As summer deepens, grass is yellow at the edges. Camps prepare to move again. What once required instruction now unfolds through shared habit. The steppe does not acknowledge this change. It continues as it always has, indifferent, reminding those who move upon it that endurance belongs not to those who act most forcefully, but to those who shape patterns capable of holding when individual strength begins to thin. Autumn arrives through subtraction. Heat loosens its hold, insects disappear, and the grass thins until the earth shows through in dull patches. Wind returns with steadier purpose, carrying the scent of drying plants and distant rain. Movement slows. Each choice now bends toward the approaching cold. The land narrows as winter enters thought before it enters ground. The man feels this tightening in his own routines. Roots once flexible are fixed. Pastures are chosen for shelter rather than abundance. He rides less widely, focusing instead on coherence. Leadership shifts from mediation to coordination. Storage, repair, and timing replace negotiation. Preparation becomes the dominant labor. Work grows visible. Felt is thickened. Hides are cured with care. Tools are mended instead of replaced. He watches these efforts closely, not to direct them, but to ensure proportion. Too much attention to one task weakens another. Survival depends on balance more than intensity. Markets thin as caravans withdraw. Exchange contracts and localizes. Trust replaces variety. He accepts fewer goods, prioritizing reliability over novelty. Information slows with the trade, leaving gaps that must be filled by observation rather than report. The group turns inward, sharpening its own awareness. Scarcity tests cohesion differently than ambition. A family loses animals to illness. Another falls behind during movement. He weighs assistance carefully. Aid is offered as bridge, not foundation. Dependence is avoided without abandoning obligation. Support is limited in scope and duration. The precedent holds. A quiet dispute emerges when past contribution is claimed as present entitlement. He listens without interruption, then returns the question to shared practice. Memory is acknowledged, but it does not override current need. The decision is restrained and impersonal. Acceptance follows, incomplete but sufficient. From these repetitions, rhythm emerges. Councils are held by season rather than crisis. Responsibilities are reaffirmed publicly without ceremony. Repetition itself becomes stabilizing. Structure now provides what personal authority once did. Expansion pauses. This is not retreat, it is consolidation. The group refines method rather than reaching outward. He chooses stillness where movement once felt necessary. Stability, he has learned, is often invisible. Night lengthens. Doubt finds more space. He measures earlier decisions against narrowing options, aware that correction now carries higher cost. Fatigue deepens, but clarity sharpens with it. Control has given way to stewardship. As frost threatens the horizon, younger figures take initiative without instruction. Routes are prepared. Labor is assigned. Disputes are settled using established patterns. His role recedes again, not through loss but through completion. The land darkens under cloud, holding the promise of winter, and with it, the understanding that endurance depends on systems shaped to withstand what no individual can command. Winter enters without ceremony. Snow falls thinly at first, then with persistence, flattening the grass and erasing the small distinctions that once guided movement. Sound dulls under cold. Distance contracts. Breath becomes visible, then precious. The steppe strips itself to essentials and demands the same discipline in return. Nothing here rewards urgency. Everything rewards preparation. The man moves less now. His authority is no longer measured by presence, but by what has already been set in place. Shelters sit where the land breaks the wind. Supplies are counted repeatedly, not from anxiety, but from habit refined over many seasons. Certainty in scarcity comes from repetition. He has learned that reassurance weakens faster than routine. Responsibility presses hardest in this season. Error carries consequence that cannot be undone quickly. He watches for signs that do not announce themselves. An animal lagging slightly, a child too quiet, a man whose hands shake longer than the cold explains. Intervention is narrow and timely. Survival depends more on restraint than rescue. The systems reveal themselves under pressure. Rotations of labor hold without reminder. Watch shifts pass cleanly. Disputes lessen, not because need disappears, but because expectation settles deeper. Justice operates through anticipation. People adjust their behavior before conflict arises. Order exists most clearly where nothing happens. Pressure arrives from beyond the snowline. Another confederation, driven inward by harsher winter, presses against shared ground. There is no anger in their movement, only necessity. He understands this logic immediately. The question is not victory but endurance. What must hold is not territory but cohesion. He chooses negotiation shaped by limit. Access is offered narrowly, tied to clear conditions. Movement is regulated. The cold enforces compliance more effectively than threat. The arrangement holds because it is precise. Violence would fracture what little stability winter permits. Restraint preserves structure. From this choice, precedent settles. Boundaries in scarcity become as important as openness in abundance. Survival is shared but not surrendered. The rule spreads quietly. It does not inspire loyalty. It produces reliability. Loss continues its work. Cold settles into joints. Sleep fractures into short intervals. Death arrives without announcement and leaves without explanation. He records each absence privately. Leadership does not protect from grief. It only prevents display. Fatigue sharpens thought until sentiment falls away. As winter deepens, he steps back further. Others enforce what has already been agreed. His authority now lives more in memory than in action. The systems hold. This knowledge brings a brief form of rest, earned and temporary. When snow drifts again across the steppe, erasing tracks almost as soon as they are made, he recognizes the pattern he has lived within. Survival narrows life, but it also distills it. What remains is what endures pressure without breaking. The thaw begins unevenly. Ice loosens during the day, returns at night. Streams crack and soften. Ground betrays weight without warning. Movement resumes cautiously. Each step tests the earth before committing. The season teaches patience through instability. He resists the urge to widen movement too quickly. Early grass deceives. He keeps the group close, allowing animals to recover gradually. Leadership here is restraint extended over time. The impulse to reclaim speed must be mastered again. Repair replaces preservation. Wagons are refitted, tack adjusted, routes reviewed. He intervenes only where balance requires steadiness. Instruction becomes unnecessary more often. Others anticipate needs, drawing on shared memory. The system responds to change with less friction. Trade reappears cautiously. Caravans probe conditions. Exchange resumes in fragments. He allows it to rebuild in layers, mindful of the dependence winter exposed. No single source is trusted fully. Balance is restored through distribution. Younger figures push outward, eager for new ground revealed by retreating snow. He does not suppress the impulse. He channels it. Scouts move first. Information returns before families follow. Expansion answers knowledge, not desire. Coordination strengthens. Signals standardize. Meeting points are reaffirmed. Time becomes shared again. He recognizes that these practices now function without him. His role narrows further, from control to calibration. As the ground firms and grass thickens unevenly, he rides at the edge of movement, observing rather than guiding. The steppe absorbs the traces of winter and reveals continuity beneath change, reminding those who depend on it that endurance comes not from momentum, but from the discipline to proceed only when the ground is ready. Late spring settles with steadier rhythm. Grass grows dense enough to hold hooves without tearing. Rivers run clear within their banks, no longer swollen, no longer fragile. Wind returns to its familiar persistence, shaping movement without resisting it. The land appears open again, but it carries the memory of constraint beneath its surface. Those who have survived the narrowing do not forget it. The man rides less often at the front. He moves along the margins, watching how decisions are made when he is not present. Disputes arise and resolve without reaching him. Tasks are assumed without instruction. Responsibility circulates. He recognizes this not as loss, but as confirmation that structure has matured beyond dependence on a single figure. With stability comes awareness of scale. Paths once sufficient for small groups now carry heavier movement. Grazing rotations require recalculation. Water access demands coordination across greater distance. He listens as others speak first, allowing solutions to surface before aligning them. Order now emerges through synthesis rather than command. Markets expand again, but in altered form. Exchange follows seasonal agreements rather than impulse. Measures standardize. Obligations are remembered across years. Trust attaches to the confederation itself, no longer bound solely to individual reputation. Stability becomes legible from a distance. A controlled challenge tests this change. A neighboring group attempts to bypass established routes, seeking advantage through speed rather than confrontation. The response is immediate and restrained. Access points close. Trade pauses. Communication remains open but firm. The system asserts itself without spectacle. The challenge dissolves under predictability. Authority settles into method. Rules no longer require reinforcement through presence. Enforcement becomes collective. Power grows quieter and heavier. Decisions separate further from emotion, stabilizing outcome at the cost of intimacy. Leadership loses warmth and gains endurance. Expansion resumes through alignment rather than force. Smaller bands observe the rhythm of movement, the regularity of exchange, the absence of chaos. They attach themselves cautiously. Integration proceeds slowly, measured by time rather than promise. Continuity is the requirement. The man feels endurance shorten in his own body. Long rides require more rest. Recovery slows. He adjusts without comment, redistributing tasks naturally. The system absorbs the change without disruption. His reduced capacity confirms its independence. Conflict becomes rarer, but not absent. When it arises, it is contained quickly, resolved through reference rather than reaction. Memory now governs response. The past functions as guide rather than burden. As summer approaches its height, he recognizes that influence no longer depends on his movement. It resides in habit. The Confederation operates as a living structure, capable of correction without crisis. His role has become custodial, preserving balance rather than advancing ambition. Evening light stretches across the grass. Camps settle into predictable order. Trade routes hum softly. Wind crosses the plain without resistance. The land accepts the pattern without acknowledgement. Durability has replaced urgency. He rides along the edge, observing the shape of what has formed. The steppe offers no praise, it offers continuity. And continuity holds, not because it was demanded, but because it was built patiently, decision by decision, until it could stand without the hands that first arranged it. Midsummer arrives without excess. Heat deepens but does not overwhelm. Grass bends under weight, resilient to trampling. Streams settle into predictable courses, neither swollen nor scarce. Wind maintains its steady passage across the open land, shaping sound and movement without altering direction. The steppe holds its balance briefly, a pause earned through restraint. The man moves almost entirely at the periphery now. His presence no longer initiates action, it confirms it. Disputes are resolved through established sequence. Decisions arise from habit rather than instruction. The structure he once guarded now sustains itself through repetition. His influence persists as memory, not motion. Trade flows with greater regularity. Caravans move along accepted paths, their passage anticipated rather than questioned. Goods circulate with fewer interruptions. Exchange has become routine, governed by expectation rather than negotiation. Risk remains, but it is managed through dispersion. No single route carries essential weight. An unfamiliar group appears from beyond the known circuits, drawn by reports of stability. Their customs differ. Friction surfaces quickly, not through hostility but mismatch. The man does not impose resolution. He encourages alignment through practice. Roles are adjusted. Access is gradual. Time becomes the measure of trust. The system adapts without strain. Justice continues its slow transformation. Memory replaces immediacy. Elders consult younger figures. Precedent shapes response. Enforcement follows agreement rather than impulse. Authority resides in process. The absence of spectacle strengthens compliance. Expansion proceeds cautiously. Smaller bands integrate only after demonstrating adherence to routine. Enthusiasm is insufficient. Continuity is required. Growth becomes conditional, deliberate, and slow. Stability remains the offering. The internal cost sharpens. Long days press against the body. Sleep shortens. Recovery lags. Even without crisis, responsibility weighs heavily. Leadership here is invisible labor, noticed only when absent. He carries it without acknowledgement. Reflection arrives in fragments. He observes the confederation operating without reference to him. Correction occurs before error spreads. This independence brings relief tempered by distance. Control has fully given way to transmission. As daylight stretches toward evening, he rides the outer paths. Camps settle in alignment. Trade continues. Wind moves through the grass unchanged. The land remains indifferent, yet responsive to order. The man understands that endurance now belongs to the system rather than to him. What persists is not his decision, but the discipline repeated until it became habit. And habit, once shared widely enough, carries forward without voice or command, as quietly as the wind crossing the steppe. Autumn advances with little announcement. The grass pales at its edges, not all at once, but in scattered patches that spread with patience. Hooves raise dust that lingers longer in the cooling air. Nights lengthen and the wind carries weight now, no longer only movement but reminder. The land prepares itself without instruction. The man remains within the structure, not above it. He moves among encampments during ordinary hours, when work is being done rather than announced. He watches procedures unfold as they were designed to do. Messengers arrive and depart without urgency. Records are kept. Disputes are logged and returned with resolution. The system speaks more often than he does. A challenge emerges not from violence but from inconsistency. One region applies rules unevenly. Another delays obligation under strain. The threat is subtle. Disorder grows quietly, fed by exception. He recognizes it early, not as rebellion but as erosion. This is the kind of failure that cannot be confronted with force. Restraint governs his response. He does not single out blame. He standardizes practice. Measurement replaces discretion. Schedules replace judgment. What varies is reduced. What repeats is reinforced. Correction becomes structural, not personal. Compliance follows clarity. New rules are circulated through established channels. They arrive as instruction, not warning. Enforcement is procedural, not punitive. Those who adjust remain within the system. Those who do not drift outward unsupported by its rhythms. Separation occurs without conflict. Markets adapt first. Regularity benefits exchange. Predictable rules strengthens trust. Caravans align their movement to the new order. Labor follows. Herds are counted. Obligations are shared. The system tightens not through pressure but through alignment. Expansion continues, but only where structure precedes arrival. Camps are laid out before people settle. Paths are marked before traffic increases. Growth follows preparation. The confederation stretches but does not thin. The man feels the cost more clearly now. Authority requires constant subtraction. Desire is limited. Preference is surrendered. He is less present in celebration, more in review. Leadership becomes a narrowing rather than an opening. At the edge of evening, he pauses along a familiar ridge. Below, the land holds its pattern. Movement continues without disorder. Fires appear in sequence. Smoke rises straight in the cooling air. What endures is no longer his resolve, but the rules that absorbed it. Order has learned to stand on its own. And when it does, the one who shaped it becomes only another figure within it, carried forward by repetition, as steadily as the seasons turn across the open steppe. Winter returns without severity, but with certainty. Snow falls thinly at first, a dusting that settles into hollows and along the leeward sides of hills. The ground hardens beneath it. Sound travels farther now. Movement becomes deliberate. The steppe narrows itself through cold, drawing life inward. The structure endures the change. Supply lines shorten. Camps contract but do not collapse. Stores are measured against need, not optimism. Movement follows rule rather than instinct. What was established in ease now proves its worth under restraint. Survival becomes confirmation. The man is present less in motion and more in record. Decisions are fewer but heavier. Each carries long consequence. He signs instruction, not command. He approves method, not outcome. Others carry execution. The distance between thought and action widens, and with it, isolation. Borders press outward through continuity rather than force. Regions beyond the Confederation adjust their behavior in response to its stability. Routes bend toward order. Markets realign. Authority expands by example. The system's gravity grows quietly. Threat remains, but it no longer defines the rhythm. Disorder appears sporadically, addressed without urgency. Response has become routine. Even violence, when unavoidable, is contained and brief. It interrupts nothing beyond itself. The structure absorbs shock without fracture. Fatigue accumulates. The man feels it in small ways: slower mounting, longer recovery, shorter patience with excess. Leadership has narrowed his life. Choice has thinned. He carries less desire than obligation. What once felt expansive now feels exacting. Loss surfaces indirectly. Companions age. Some are absent. Others remain but diminished. Continuity demands replacement, not mourning. Roles persist even as individuals fade. The system does not pause for grief. It cannot. He observes younger figures moving with confidence. They apply rule without hesitation. They correct deviation without appeal. The work no longer requires his presence to continue. This knowledge brings calm, edged with displacement. As winter deepens, the wind scours the plain clean of excess. Tracks remain visible longer. Movement leaves record. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is hidden. The man understands that his labor has shifted from construction to release. Stability no longer needs his vigilance. It asks only that he not interfere. What remains of his power lies in withdrawal. The land holds its silence. Snow reflects light without color. Wind moves as it always has. And within that vast repetition, authority begins to pass not through gesture or declaration, but through the simple fact that order continues when one man grows quiet. Spring returns slowly, as if uncertain of welcome. Snow recedes in narrow lines along the slopes, revealing ground darkened by months of stillness. Water loosens and begins to move again, not in rush, but in patient channels already known. The steppe exhales. Wind resumes its older tone, lighter, persistent, unchanged by what has passed. The man's movement has diminished. He rides shorter distances, remains longer in one place. Decisions still reach him, but fewer require shaping. Most require only acknowledgement. The structure answers itself before his judgment arrives. What once demanded vigilance now asks only presence. Responsibility begins to transfer without ceremony. Tasks pass to those already performing them. Authority shifts through routine, not declaration. There is no single moment of release. It occurs through accumulation, through days in which nothing requires correction. Leadership thins into oversight, then into habit observed rather than enforced. Memory becomes heavier than command. He recalls winters of scarcity, disputes settled by force, alliances held together by necessity alone. The contrast is quiet but unmistakable. What exists now rests on repetition, not fear. Order has replaced urgency. The internal cost resolves into stillness. Fatigue no longer resists. Loss no longer demands attention. What remains is a narrowing awareness of time. He understands that continuity is indifferent to him. It requires only that what has been built is not disrupted. Others prepare without instruction. Camps align. Routes reopen. Markets resume their pattern. The system moves forward with the season. His absence from motion does not alter its course. Succession is not announced. It unfolds. Responsibility settles where it has already been practiced. Names matter less than roles. The structure accepts its next carriers without pause. Authority does not change hands. It persists. As the grass rises again, bending under the familiar wind, the land reveals no mark of the man's passage. Tracks fade. Fires burn and extinguish. Movement continues along paths worn smooth by use. What remains is not memory of an individual, but a way of holding the land together long enough for others to move across it without fear. And in that endurance, the steppe teaches its final lesson, that continuity belongs not to those who command, but to what is repeated carefully until it no longer needs a voice at all. Summer wanes slowly. The grass, thick and resilient, begins to fade to muted gold. Streams run shallow and clear, the water steady but diminished. Wind shifts early in the morning, carrying a hint of frost yet to come. The steppe speaks its language quietly, in color, sound, and movement, and those who live upon it read these signs carefully. The man rides along the peripheries, observing the younger leaders who now orchestrate grazing, trade, and labor. He intervenes rarely, only when subtle misalignments threaten coherence. Authority has become a web of practiced routines. The Confederation no longer waits for his instruction. Presence has given way to system. Trade consolidates with measured certainty. Caravans move steadily, their loads balanced. Passage is predictable, reliable. Networks extend across the steppe, yet no single route dominates. Dependence is tempered by redundancy. Every step of the network reinforces stability, every delay accounted for in advance. Minor conflicts arise. Young riders test boundaries with neighboring bands. Impulse is met with measured adjustment. Grazing areas are reassigned, responsibilities rotated, patterns repeated. Discipline is now a matter of procedure, not punishment. The Confederation expands quietly. Smaller groups attach themselves not through conquest, but by observation. They follow the rhythm of work, grazing, and trade that has already been established. Integration is conditional and deliberate. Continuity is valued over enthusiasm. The man feels the weight of time pressing on his body. Long rides exhaust him more quickly. Recovery lags. Fatigue has become a companion, yet the system absorbs these limitations without disruption. Independence now rests in the structure, not the individual. Evening light stretches across the plain. Camps settle into their familiar order. Fires burn low, smoke rising straight. Wind passes, indifferent, across the land. The Confederation endures. Stability no longer requires his intervention. A distant band approaches, displaced by early frost in northern pastures. They arrive seeking inclusion. The system, guided by established precedent, adjusts access. Integration occurs quietly. Friction is absorbed. The newcomer's path is measured against the rules already in place. Memory continues to guide action. Elders consult the younger leaders. Past resolutions shape present decisions. Justice operates through expectation and repetition rather than force. Authority resides in method, not presence. The man reflects on the years. Winter and summer, scarcity and abundance, disputes and resolution, all have accumulated into a pattern that no single figure can claim. The Confederation functions with its own momentum. His role is no longer command but observation. He rides at the edge, noting the precision of the structures he helped shape. Camps follow rotation without oversight. Trade proceeds without interference. Paths are maintained by collective memory rather than individual instruction. Continuity has become tangible. Responsibility has shifted fully to the collective. Leadership is diffused. Young figures move with confidence, applying precedent, enforcing rhythm. The man watches quietly. Influence now exists primarily as example. The internal cost has shifted from action to observation. Fatigue is less physical and more contemplative. Decisions are measured not for immediate effect, but for long-term endurance. The Confederation is a living system. He is merely its witness. Expansion reaches its natural limit. The system stabilizes. Inclusion occurs selectively by observation, by proof of adherence to routine. Growth is no longer rapid, no longer spectacular, but steady. The man pauses on a ridge overlooking the steppe. He notes camps adjusting themselves without his presence. Trade routes hum predictably. Disputes resolve before escalation. The structure has learned to operate independently. Sunlight softens. The wind moves steadily across the plain, flattening the grass briefly before letting it rise. The steppe holds its lesson. Authority, once exercised, persists only when encoded into habit, memory, and method. He recalls the small encampment of his youth, the first lessons of responsibility, the early seasons spent learning restraint. The steppe has not changed. Only the people and the structures around him have grown. He turns his gaze to the horizon. The Confederation continues, its rhythm established and self-sustaining. Continuity is no longer dependent on him, but on those who have learned to act within its pattern. And as the wind sweeps across the frost-hardened grass, he realizes a single enduring truth. The survival of order depends not on ambition, nor on presence, but on the quiet discipline to let structures endure beyond the hands that first shaped them. The land stretches open before him, familiar yet transformed. In the distance, The patterns of camps and paths echo the lessons of the steppe tribal confederations. The story of survival, restraint, and structure continues. Linking Chapter 2 back to Chapter 1, where the first seeds of responsibility gave rise to the empire that moves now without reliance on a single hand. The man rides slowly toward the outer edges, a witness to the living order he has cultivated. The steppe absorbs every trace, indifferent yet responsive, carrying forward the legacy of discipline, endurance, and the careful shaping of systems that will outlast him, as it has always done. The sun dips below the horizon, fires burn low, camps settle in predictable sequence. The wind carries no notice, yet teaches the ultimate lesson. That order, once nurtured patiently and repeatedly, can endure beyond any individual. And the empire itself begins with such quiet constancy. The first shadows of night stretch across the plain. The steppe, vast and unclaimed, holds its pattern. And within it, the rhythm of generations, the same winds, rivers, and paths that shaped the steppe tribal confederations, continues without pause, signaling that the foundations laid long ago remain, waiting for the next chapter of history to unfold.